Hi, and welcome to Dev Superpowers webinar series. My name is Danijel Malik, and I am a Visual Studio ALM MVP, and I work as a solution architect at SSW. So today I'm going to teach you how you can build your own extensions for Visual Studio. Now, you're probably familiar with many other extensions that are available out there in the Visual Studio Gallery, like ReSharper, CodeRush, and many others. But the thing for today is how you can build one of these extensions for yourself. So what I'm going to teach you today is the basics, pretty much what you need to know before you can start building anything. And then I'm going to show you two different products. One is SSW Code Auditor, which used to be a desktop application that scans your code and then comes up with a report of what is good in your code and what you have to fix. And the other tool is something that I have built just playing around with the Visual Studio extensibility model, just to see what are the capabilities, and I'll show you both of them pretty soon. With Code Auditor, I'm going to show you how you can wire up the commands and do all sort of things like controlling the status bar. And with the other one, which is a bit of a secret for now, but you'll see it for yourself later, is how you can modify the solution or create projects in the solution and things like that, and how you can interact with other components like NuGet. So we have plenty of things to talk about today. No slides. This is a hardcore session, so we're going to go straight to Visual Studio, and I'm going to show you how you can do all sort of things. Okay, so I'm going to close this one. And the first thing, I am in Visual Studio 2013. And as you can see, my selection is pointing to extensibility project. You need to have Visual Studio SDK installed. So if you go to, let's go to Visual Studio SDK 2013, you will have it at disposal through either Visual Studio Gallery, or if you go directly to the Microsoft download page, you download the Visual Studio 2013 SDK, and then you can start building the Visual Studio extensions for yourself. Now with Visual Studio 2015, it comes in the installer, so you have to take one of the checkboxes which says extensibility or something like that, and then you get your Visual Studio SDK for 2015. There are small differences between the two of them. So in this one, we have three different project types. Visual Studio Package is the one that we'll choose and start building on top of it. Visual Studio Isolated Shell is if you want to build like your own application that will be sitting on top of Visual Studio, like, I don't know, Python. I think the Python tools have done this. But let's say you want to build an environment that will be working on completely different code, so something that you invent, and you want to use Visual Studio features, that's where you would be using Visual Studio Isolated Shell. And Visual Studio Add-in, I think that one is just for compatibility with an obsolete code or legacy, whatever you have. So in this case, if I go on and select this one, a widget comes up, and from here I choose next. Then I can choose what language I want to use. So in this case I prefer C#. It has to be signed, so I'll have to use a strong name, or either I can use an existing one. In this case I'll just go on and create a new key for myself. I'll leave everything as is, but basically what you can do here, you can type in your company name, you can type what's the package name, what version it is, change the icon, add some description here, and then you can move on. So I'm gonna click next, and this is the first thing where I want to be actually paying a bit more attention. So the widget itself gives me an option to create either a menu command, tool window, or a custom editor. So in this case I'll be just interested in the menu command. So I'm gonna click on this checkbox, and I'll be happy with what it is. So I'm gonna go next, and then it asks me what I want to give this command a name. Now you can change all this. So for this demonstration I'll just go ahead and I'm gonna click next, and I can deselect the unit tests and the integration tests because I don't need them at this stage. Later, if you want to build something for yourself, you'll probably want to create them. Okay, so when I press finish, Visual Studio generates a package for myself. So from here on, I can press the F5 or click on the start button, and what will happen is that Visual Studio will load another instance of Visual Studio, which is called experimental instance. So let's wait for that instance to come up. And the package, you probably haven't noticed that, but there was one message saying that the VS package 2 was being loaded. Now if I load that instance, you don't see anything special here actually, but under the tools you will see that there is one thing, or actually now this is duplicated because there is another package sitting there with the same command. But if I click on one of these guys, so this one is from the VS package 1, so I'll get rid of this guy for now. So this one was the previous one, we don't need it. We're gonna get rid of this guy too. And I'm just gonna restart. Okay. So this guy is gone. And under here I have one command that's called my command name. So if I click on this guy, what happens? It comes up with a message box, and that's all it pretty much does. So what we're gonna do now, I'm just gonna reset my instance. So there is one command line that you can reset your experimental instance to what it was. If you want to start building new things, or if things go wrong, you can easily remove the packages and bring it back to the state where it's clean. Okay, so let's have a look at what pretty much I have here. There is a project called VS Package. Now the first thing is how it was able actually to run inside the Visual Studio. So I'm gonna go here to Properties, and under the debug there is a command called start external program, and it points to Visual Studio. Well, it would be good if I could go to that one, to dev env.exe. But the important part is here, the command line argument, it needs to be root suffix exp, and that tells Visual Studio that it has to load inside of the experimental instance. That's pretty much all you have to do here. It's all preset, but if for some reason you lose that startup argument, you know what you have to type in, otherwise you cannot start up. Okay, now we come to the core of our Visual Studio package, which is, as you probably could recognize from the code, it's a package. So my class, VS package 2 package, not very convenient name, but we'll live with this, derives from the package class. And in here I have a couple of commands, a couple of methods that I can override. But the most interesting one, so let's go to override. I have a couple of things, I can play with them. I won't be diving into any of this, but the most important one, which you can already see when the package was created, is the initialize. So from here on I can decide what I want to do. Now if you remember, I created one command in my wizard, and with that command it had to be wired up somehow. So this is where the funny part actually happens. You have to get a service. So one Visual Studio is composed of a ton of different services, and they all come together through kind of two different streams. There is an old stream which used to be, or actually still is, it's a COM. There are COM interfaces and COM implementations, and the other one is coming through the MEF extensibility graph. So there are two different components. MEF, if you're building WPF or Silverlight applications, you're probably familiar with that one, but I assume you already know that Visual Studio 2010 Plus is built on top of Visual WPF, which means that they were slowly starting to build up things on the new technologies. And this is the command, which one I'm getting from is the COM command, but I'll touch the MEF components and other things later when we come to those. So commands, as they're still using the old technology. So as you can see, I have here only menu command service, and this is how I get it. So get service, and then I have to type of the name of the interface, which one I actually want to get back, and then I have to cast it to whatever I actually want. Now this is generated code. You have to believe me that it's safe. The other thing that's really important regarding Visual Studio extensibility is that there is not much documentation. Actually, there is some. So if I go, I'll switch to my browser for a second because I want to guide you through these steps. So if you want to extend Visual Studio, you will find some documentation on the MSDN. So in my case, we're going to look into the menus, not every possible combination, because the object model for Visual Studio extensibility is huge, so it's really difficult to get through every single thing. But for now, for start, we're just going to look at the commands. So if I want to add a command to the Visual Studio menu bar, the package actually, or the widget I used, has done everything for me. But if you want to understand what actually is happening, there are a couple of other sections on the MSDN, and you can read through them because I won't be diving into those details as they are described on the MSDN page. But I want to give you a heads up of what you can expect and how to wire up things together. So I'm gonna go back to my VS package 2. So this is where my only menu command service was actually created, so that variable actually contains that instance. And now from here on, I can actually add a command. As you can see down here, I have an add command method, and if I call that one, I have to provide a menu command. And the menu command is pretty much whatever you use. Doesn't matter if it's here on the menu or if it's a button, whatever you want to use, all is recognized as a menu command. But that menu command has to be composed of the command ID and what is the callback. So the command ID actually has to know to what command set that command actually belongs to. And in my case, this is one GUID VS package to CMD set. So this is a default name. You can create your own command sets. I'll show you later how I did that with Code Auditor. But for now, we'll just keep it simple because I want to explain how you can actually wire things together before we go into details. Now this command ID has some ID it has to have, and it has to be unique for that command set. So basically you can have two different command sets with the same command ID. So I don't know if that would be really good or best practice, but you can do that. Okay, so from here on, I have my command ID created through the new command ID, and I provide to which CMD set it goes, and then I can use that command ID in here in my new menu command. And in the menu command, I provide actually what is the callback, so what will happen when I actually execute this command. So in this case, menu item callback will be called. So this is one of the services that I'm getting back. I could actually remove that code and simply call message box. So let's gonna get this guy. It would be greater if I used something from WPF, but I can use Windows Forms or whatever I want here. So from this point on, it's nothing different than writing any business application or whatever you're actually trying to do. So if I want to do something like this, let me try to build it. Okay, and if I start this, it should come back with a message box test as soon as I press the button. So let's try this again. It's still loading. I'll give it a bit of... Okay, here we go. So if I click on this guy, you see it's coming back with a regular message box test. Now the other way that you have seen here was a pretty safe way of how you can actually do something inside Visual Studio if you're calling different interfaces and if you want message box to be properly handled inside Visual Studio. Anyway, so now we touched the most important part, which is where our logic is, but the question is where actually the command was defined and how it actually was pushed under the tools menu. As you could see it here on the top, there was my menu command. The other important bit in the package itself is the vsct file, and in the vsct file you have a command table defined for your package, and this guy is actually building as a vsct compile. If we want to look into details a bit, I'm going to show you something. So this guy, where is vsct? Is this one? No. Oh, here it is. Oops, sorry, I wanted to show you something else. So in the VS package, this one, now this is very important to understand because this is the part that is used in code. So this item or this guy has to be the vsct compile, and what happens, it converts all the commands into one resource name that's called menu city menu. And if I go here in the VS package and back to my package itself, you will see that the provide menu resource name is coming from menu city menu. So this is how the bits are wired together. So I could rename this guy to whatever I want, as long as this resource name is the same, that everything should be fine. Now in this schema I have plenty of possibilities. So I have another link here. Let me see if it's this guy. Yep. So it explains these little details indeed regarding what you have to do with menus and how things are wired together. But there should be another one. Just give me a second. Should have a link somewhere. Oh yeah, so here is Visual Studio Commands table, and there we go, command table configuration. Oops, sorry, it's the wrong one. I think it must be this guy. Nope. Yep, so this is the guy that actually explains. So if you want save this link, you'll probably need it if you want to do anything there. It explains what exactly you can put in that vsct file. So pretty much we're talking about the commands, we're talking about menus, groups, buttons, and so forth. I won't go into detail because you can read all this on MSDN pages, but I want to show you pretty much the basic things that you need to know here. So I'm gonna clean this a bit because it's full of comments, and then I'm gonna guide you through these little things. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, so how this application is wired up is pretty simple in this case. Everything has to be defined through symbols. So you can see here, I'm gonna split the screen for now. I didn't really want this. Let me just pick up this guy and this guy. So down here there is one guy called GUID VS package to CMD set. This CMD set is defined here, and of course it's defined here in code too. So if I'm going to show you here, there is one class called GUID.cs, and there I have that GUID, which is the same as here. So those guys have to match, otherwise you won't be able to wire up your commands with whatever you have in code. So that's the GUID you need to use for the the symbol you have to use for the CMD set. Now, as I mentioned before, each command has to belong into one command set. In my case, I have that command defined here, and there is one menu group. So pretty much with the groups you can define if things inside one command set are falling to different logical groups. That's how you would actually define them later. Okay, so now my menu group and my command ID, they belong to that command set. This is pretty much regarding the symbols. There are another thing here that it's called GUID images. So here I define what images I'll actually be using for my commands. So let's say on the menu or on a button, I want to display an icon, and that's where I would use an image to display it there. So symbols are pretty much the heart of the command table. You can't do anything without them. So let's say I just change something here. If that GUID doesn't exist, if I try to build that, you'll see that down here it just doesn't work. So it will come back and it will say that this is not defined. Oops. So I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna fix that, and if I try to build that now, it should be all fine. So where is Visual Studio? It's here. You see that the errors are now gone. Okay, so let's spend a bit more time here to explain how the hierarchy is here designed. So I have a group for my buttons. So buttons actually contains all buttons that I would have on my Visual Studio, whatever I want. In this case it was just a simple button, so button actually belongs to the menu. So whatever you see here, actually this was a button. That's how it was called. And for that button I have to define to which command set it will belong to, what it'll be the ID. So if you see down here, that was my command ID, and I have to tell it to which command set it goes. Priority defines in what order you want it to be, so this one would probably sit somewhere close to the bottom, depending on the group it will actually belong to. So if there was another group, my group, it would be probably sitting at the bottom of that group. So here is the parent. Parent is in the same CMD set, and if there are multiple commands in that CMD set, for that particular group, this button would be sitting somewhere at the bottom. But if I change this one to 0, it will go to the top. So I assume you're getting the idea. The other thing here is I define what is the icon, and with the icon I can actually use whatever I want as long as that is defined in the symbols. So you will see that this BMP PIC1 is defined here in this list, which is down here. So this is my images list, and it will tell me what image I want to use. So pretty much the syntax is not very straightforward, but you define what's the file that's being used. It's a sprite. If I go here and I show it images, you will see there are 16, well, multiplier of 16 is width and height is 16, so you can play with this if you want to. You can actually define more different files if you want to, and pull together different image groups, whatever you feel like. And then you just define where the first one will go, and then you can index them. Okay, so in this case I'm just using the first image. So if I go back to this guy, you remember that the command that I was using was 1x, but if I change that to something else, that's how it would appear there. Okay. And the last bit is strings, where I defined what I want to actually use. So there are a couple of other things. So I have a button text, I can define canonical name, what will be the command name. So if I want to change how it will appear under command line. So if I go here, not in this guy, is the other one still open? No, it's not. Okay, I'll just demonstrate this here, but let's say if I want to change something in keyboard, you will see that these are command names, and that's how they appear here. If you want to change how they will appear there, then you would use the different things like lock canonical name is the one that actually defines what you will be using under the tools.commands and things like that. And there are a couple of other options. So if you go over here, maybe so this guy, so the tooltip will be defined here. If I change here a tooltip, it would appear as soon as I move my mouse over the button or the command. That would be defined here. If I want to change the menu text, so there are a couple of options, you can play with them. I won't be diving into those details. And that's regarding the buttons. So this is a very simple schema. Now there are groups, and groups are logical groups that you can actually define and say where you want to push your commands. So in this case, if I want to push something to the tools menu, I have to say, okay, this is my menu group and I want it to be somewhere at the bottom. Let's say, because this is pretty high number, it could go even higher, but that's irrelevant now. And then I have to define a parent to that group, and in this case I'm using GUID SHL main menu. Now this guy is not defined anywhere in my package and it's coming from Visual Studio. So if I'm gonna search after this guy, you will come up to this, probably to this page, where you will see that GUID SHL menu is the GUID of the main menu of the shell. So if I want to place something up there, that's where I want to define things. And there is another ID, which is ID vs menu tools. So if I'm gonna look for this guy, and I'm gonna click on the first link, you will get a list of the IDs that are available in Visual Studio menu bar. So in my case, if I look after my guy, you can see that the ID vs menu tools is actually the menu of the tools. So if I want to push something on under let me kill this guy. So if I want to push something here on under the tools menu, I would have to use that the parent is the SHL main menu and it has to go to this ID. So this is how I actually managed to create a simple command, and now I'm going to show you how I actually put together a code editor. I'm going to close this app. This was just a simple app for demonstration, and I'm going to switch to something in Visual Studio 2015. So Code Editor is an application that is has a pretty long history. It has been built in 2005 as a Windows Forms application, and then it went through quite a few iterations, and it ended up as a WPF app now with a command line support. We have pending changes windows in Visual Studio, all sort of things. One of the features that we have built is the Visual Studio extension. So if I'm gonna go here, I have a V6 ready. Same thing here. If I go under debug, I'm running it on my experimental instance. So let me run this one, and I'm going to show you what it does and then how I actually built the entire command table. So let's just wait for it to load. So currently Visual Code Editor supports 3 different versions of Visual Studio. It supports Visual Studio 2012, 2013 and 2015. So now it's loading my experimental instance. Let's give it a bit more time. So you can see here it's loading something, and the first thing you'll notice here on top, there is a menu called Code Editor. Now that's the first big change that I want to later touch. It's different. You have to make things a little bit different in your VSCT file if you want to push things on the top menu rather than under any of these specific menus. So under the Code Editor menu, I have a couple of commands. So I have scan pending changes, I have scan git changes, a couple of other things. I have sub menus, and apart from that, this is pretty simple thing. Now one of the other things we support here is if I go to pending changes, you can see that there is another section called Code Auditor, and I'm gonna explain later how you can actually build a section for Team Explorer or something like that. So I'm gonna close Code Auditor for now. So what you can actually, I'm gonna stop here for a second. What you can see here is that one of the commands is disabled. So if I go scan pending changes, you can see there is some interaction with the window itself. Now Code Auditor will go through my pending changes, so here there are none. So it will come up with a clean report, so that should be fine. One of the things you will probably notice down here, you can see that there was some interaction with the status bar, and there is some icon happening down here in the bottom. So this is what I'm gonna show you, how you can do these kind of things for yourself. So first thing, if I'm gonna run this guy again, you can notice that the commands have changed their status. So that's something I want to show you too, how you can do things like this for yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna kill this instance, and I'm gonna guide you to my code here. So first thing, I'm gonna go to my VSCT file just to explain how that schema is actually defined, and I'm gonna collapse everything. So I have plenty of symbols defined down here at the bottom. I have my images, which are coming from the resource file, like the same thing as I showed in the demo. I have a couple of images here, and then I define them how I want them, in what order, and then I just use them from here. Then I have different command groups for my, these are command sets. So I have different command sets for different sub-menus. So this is one for help, one for Windows, and this is the top level, which is what you see under the code. Under the Code Auditor. And then I have a couple of groups defined. So there is top level menu, that's the one in here. Then I have a sync group. So if you have noticed some what are those splitters in the menu, these are pretty much defined through the groups. So I have scan group, I have sync group, and then I can just tell where do I want the group to begin. So let me just run this again to demonstrate what actually is there, and I'll keep that instance open for now. So I didn't start a debugger. I'll just wait for the instance to come up. Okay, so here you can see that there are different groups, and that's how I kept things separated when they're under the same menu. So in my case, in Code Auditor, I have different sync group, and there is a scan group, and then the other two, which are actually defined down here. There is Windows menu group and there is help menu group. So looking at those, this is a scan group, this is a sync group, this is a Windows group, and this is a help group, and I can actually define through the code whether I want this group to be split from others or not. So this is completely up to me what I want to do with that. So each one of the ID symbols defined here are later being used up here. So bitmaps itself, they're pretty easy, so I'll just skip them for now, and I'm gonna go through my buttons here. So I have a couple of buttons. So this one is for rules. There is one section here called Windows Rules. So if I click on this guy, it brings up a window where all rules are defined for Code Auditor. Nothing really special actually, it just shows up a dialog. There is another one to bring up the options. There is About Box. They're pretty simple. Now this one is a bit more interesting because what I did here, I changed the strings. So I defined in this guy actually belongs to the help menu. I told him to what command group it actually goes to. Nothing really special, but I changed the menu text here, so how it would appear if it was a bit different. So if I didn't change the lock canonical name, if I went to my commands window, so if I went here to tools, options, and then if I want to define a different keyboard shortcut, if I didn't change that name, it would be spelled like request a feature, which is something I really didn't want to, so that's why I changed it to request feature. It's much nicer. Same thing here. Nothing really special for those commands. Now there is another one here which is pretty interesting, and this one is for scan solution. So this one has dynamic visibility. That's another command flag here. So let me show you something. Did I just close the other guy? No. So there is one command that's not even appearing here, but let me show you something. If I click on new project, and if I just create a console application, there is another command that appears here, and that's scan solution. I'm going to explain later how I actually control the states of the commands, but what is really important for now is that you can control visibility of commands through the file, through the code, as long as you provide the flag here what kind of visibility you want. And there are a couple of options you can choose from here, so you can tell what is dynamic visibility, what things do you want here. Plenty of things to play with. In my case, it was really important that it had dynamic visibility, otherwise I couldn't change the visibility of that command. Same thing with this guys. Probably I could just hide them. They're not really they don't really need to be dynamic, but in some cases we just want to hide them. So let's say if you're supporting different versions of Visual Studio, I'm supporting 3 different versions, and in this case, let's say for Git command changes, Git doesn't have support in Visual Studio 2012. So in that case, I'll just hide that command based on the version that I'm actually using. So commands itself are defined pretty simple, and all of them they are actually wired up through the initialize method later in code. So the bitmaps itself, they're simple. I mentioned them before. Another interesting section is here, key bindings. Now what you probably will notice straight ahead is if I go to code editor, there are a couple of commands defined, a couple of shortcuts defined here on the far right side of each of these items. Now they weren't defined through the tools, options, and keyboard. They weren't, but of course I can change them now. Let's say code editor. I can change whatever I want here. So let's say scan git changes. Maybe I want it to be control key control F5. If I do this, this will be my global command now. You can see that I changed it to control slash and control F5. But by default, I chose to define what will be the predefined commands, and this is what you do here in the key bindings section. So this is all described in the designing the VSCT file. You can read through the sections and see how you can do things for yourself. I won't be diving too much into details, but I want to give you a heads up. I can just tell here to what command set and what command I want to define this shortcut, and this is all I have to do. This editor key, this is something you'll always have to keep as is. It's something that's the I don't really understand what's the purpose for it, but it's always the same name. Okay, so now I have my VSCT file ready. I'm just not gonna do any changes for now, and then I'm gonna go into my code editor package. So this guy has quite some code in there. There is a lot of commands and logic, so I'm reusing a lot of code from my desktop application, so it has pretty much the shared code through one assembly, and then I'm just invoking commands into different view models from there. Okay, so the first thing here is my initialize method, and in the initialize method I do a bunch of things, but one of the important things for us is in this case that I want to have commands defined. So there is initialize commands is hidden here under the initialize defaults, and in initialize defaults Just give me a second. There should be. Oh, here it is. Initialize commands. But you can see that I actually require that I have menu commands service ready. And this one is actually a read-only property, so if I don't have anything here defined, it will just get that service automatically. So the code is a bit optimized, nothing really special, but I just want to make sure that I don't have any unhandled exceptions there if something goes wrong. Anyway, so in my initialize commands, I pretty much look at my all different command sets, and then I just define all commands and what are their callbacks. So if I go through the simple one, scan solution, all I do here, I look at the interesting object, which is DTE, and DTE is a COM object that is coming from the I think it's env DTE interface. It's a COM interface, so don't stress yourself about it, but it has quite a few nice properties. One of them is solution, and you can look at what is the solution name, if it's opened, what are the files, and all sort of things. So what I do here, if I want to scan the solution, I will use this guy, so which is the DTE. So let's say DTE will give me plenty of things. I can look through the active documents, what windows I have opened, all sort of stuff. So it's a bit of a exploration here. So a lot of things you're seeing here, they are not documented. I had to go through them, so it's a bit painful. You have to play with them. Visual Studio might crash from time to time when you're trying to debug and step into things. So it's a bit of fun journey to say. So if we stick to the basic stuff, so what I do here, I have that interface. So this interface is defined as a property, and I just call that service provider to get back the service. So the command itself shouldn't be any different. I could actually do it like this. So this get service is the same method as here, and then I'm querying the I want to get back the DTE, and then I have to cast it back because that get service method will return you back an object. Then you have to, of course, get your proper instance to be casted as you want it. So in this case, if I don't have any file name, I'll just quit, and reset is just a method that cancels my I'm using some asynchronous things in the back, so I'm using tokens or cancellation tokens to cancel my tasks and parallel methods that are happening somewhere down in the chain. If everything is fine, what I do, I call one global method which is called scan. Nothing really simple, so this is nothing really hard. This is just the business logic of the product itself. But what I want to highlight here is what I'm actually doing with the status bar. So as you can see, here is a property called status bar, and I can control quite a lot of things on the status bar if I want. So if I go here on the DTE, and if I go to status bar, I can call animate, I can call clear, I can call highlight, and I can call progress, and there are a couple of other things if I want to control the text and things like that. Okay, so animate is if you want to change the animation in the bottom corner, you can do the sync, you can do a couple of other things. So let's say I want to animate something here, and then I have to tell it if I want it to be turned on or off. So in this case, I'll just turn it on, and the silly thing here is that you have to provide the proper animation enum, and the interface itself is actually asking you for the object. So in my case, what I used is the VS status animation. So these are predefined animations inside Visual Studio. If you want to play with them, this is how you get them. So they are defined in the env DTE interface, in the env DTE assembly, and there are quite a few available at disposal. So there is a general one, don't really know what icon it does. If you want to do something with printing or saving, it'll get its own animation. So in my case, all I really care about is the general animation. It's nothing really special. And you can see that what I do here, I can highlight so that the color of the status bar will change when I call this, and then I say I want to turn on the animation, and then I can change the status bar text to whatever I want. So then I have some business logic here, nothing really special. But the important bit down here when you're playing with the animation is you have to use the same object when you're turning the animation off. If you don't, you'll get an exception, so that's something just be aware of. Another thing that's happening is I changed the progress, but that's hidden somewhere else, so I'm gonna show you this bit here. So I have one callback in my business logic that is actually reporting me a progress back, and I just have a lambda expression here, what's happening when I get back some progress from the scan. And that's where how I actually control that through the DTE status progress bar. So let me show you this here. So let's say DTE, if I want to go to status bar progress, I have a couple of parameters here. So of course I want to tell her if it's in progress. I'll say yes. This will show me what I'm having on the progress bar, and then I can just tell what I want to use. So let's say I want to show test, and in this case I can tell her how much it's completed. So let's say if I want to show 10% of 100, that's how I would do it, and the progress bar would display accordingly to whatever I push in here. And this is how you can control the status bar. So the commands itself have another functionality, which is query, and I just want to show you this guy. So whenever I'm creating a command, so let's take a few steps back. So here are all my commands defined, and what I want to do here is I want to control whether the command is visible or whether the command is disabled and things like that. So I created one method which actually all it does, it creates my Oli command and it passes in the callback, and then it just uses the command ID based on whatever is passed in here. So nothing really special. What is important is that I use this before query status, and this one actually helps me to define what I want to do with this command depending on what command actually is. So when the event is triggered for this guy, I will have to cast whatever the sender was to my Oli command, and if it's nothing, well, I'll just carry on. But then again, if I move on to the switch, here I actually define what I want to do based on the command ID. So my command IDs are defined in one of the classes here, nothing really special, they're just IDs, they're exactly the same ones as in the VSCT file, but just they're declared nicely. So what I'm doing here is when it's Visual Studio querying for the status update for that specific command, I can tell the command whether it should be displayed or whether it should be disabled and things like that. And this is how I actually control my commands in Code Editor. So I have one feature set which is called supported services, and I get those supported services based on whatever Visual Studio version is, and then I just check whether that supported services, which is pretty much flags, has specific things. So if you remember, I mentioned before that Visual Studio 2012 doesn't support Git. So this is where I will hide my command if there is no Git support. Or with other words, this won't be appearing there. So let me show you this bit. This defined supported services. So this is one simple helper class, and in here I just tell what are the supported services for my Visual Studio version. So 2013 and 2015 support. I can use go to line, I can use TFS pending changes. So these are features inside Code Auditor. They're not really anything special, but these are the flags that are being returned for each specific version of Visual Studio. And what I'm doing here, I'm just checking whether this flag is actually available. If it's not, I'll just hide that command. And the other thing is, if my scan is already in progress, I just want to disable all commands there. So that's another bit that's really important to understand if you want to change or hide commands and things like that. So with this, I have covered commands and status bars. Now I'm going to switch the focus to another application, or actually the extension, which is called the Magic Lamp. And now this Magic Lamp, I'm just going to demonstrate quickly what it's actually doing. So I'm gonna run this. So this time I'm in Visual Studio 2013. Let's wait for it to open. When you start the experimental instance, nothing really special is available here, except if you look closely, you'll see that in Solution Explorer there is another icon, and of course it's a magic lamp. So if I click on this guy, my Genie comes up, and Genie is nothing else than just another WPF application, but I want to just show what actually I can do with this. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm just gonna choose MVC Angular JS, and I'm gonna give, usually if I want to create a solution, I just usually will start with the company name and what's the solution name. So let's say here in this case it will be SSW, and I'll call this one Angular MVC. I'm gonna click create. So if you're looking closely, what it's doing here, it's actually creating a project called SSW Angular MVC.web, and I'll give it a bit of time just to load all NuGet packages to that solution. And then, so what it did, it just created another project in the solution, nothing really special. But if you look closely, what will start happening now, we'll look at the scripts and just wait a bit. It should start anytime soon. Okay, here we go. So what you're seeing here, you can see that the Angular JS is being added to this solution, and now I have my Angular JS available here in the solution. And if I go here and look at my NuGet packages, you will see that Angular JS has been added to this solution. So the question is how you can actually do something like this. Now I'm going to show you another example which is a bit more advanced, and I'm going to show you SSW data onion. So I'm going to do this SSW onions. I'm going to go create. Now this is a bit different example, and what it's doing is very similar to what you have seen in the first example, but it's a bit smarter. So what happened here, you can see that there are quite a few solution folders defined, and in each solution folder you can see there are organized projects in there, and even more. So if I go here to the presentation, you can see that there will be references to SSW onions business.contracts, and there is SSW.onions.common. And if I go to this guy, you will see that this one is referencing other guys. So the question is how you can build something like that. So the tool itself is pretty simple. Actually, you can find the code here. So where is GitHub? Oh, here it is. So if you go to my GitHub repository, you can find my Magic Lamp solution there. Feel free to fork it or submit pull requests. It's up to you. You can play with this as much as you want. Now I'm going to give you a heads up of how this thing was actually built. So there are a couple of things happening under the hood. So one of the things is that it's creating the right project. So you can see that this one was the Visual Studio web application, and this one is just a classic C# library. and then I'm going to explain how you can add references and play with things like this. So back to my magic lamp. So I won't be diving into the logic of the app too much. So here on top you can just see that there are a couple of things defined. There are WPF related things, so nothing to worry about. More interesting will be, here it is, the magic lamp package. So the package itself has another command defined up there. That command, as we're speaking of it, where is the VSCT file? Okay, let's search for it. Magic lamp. It goes to a different ID under the menus. So if I look for this guy again in menus, I've lost, okay, here. So if you want to push something, no, not the right one. So if you want to push something that's not very common toolbar or something like that, you can search for that one. And this one, in my case, I wanted to push it to the Solution Explorer toolbar, and this is the IDE. So those IDEs are not very intuitive to figure out. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of browsing and figuring out things for yourself, but this is how you can do it if you want to push things on the Solution toolbar, Solution Explorer toolbar. Nothing really special, but I think it would be worth to mention it. Anyway, back to my magic lamp package. So I have this command defined here, and after you click OK on the dialog that shows up, so my genie, I just called create solution, and this is what I do. So I have one main view model defined, and those three items you have seen, like SSW, Data Onion, and Angular MVC, these are templates that I predefine in code. I won't be diving too much into how I pull together the template, but I just want to show you what it does and what you probably might be interested in. So one of the things I had to dig in was how you can actually find where your projects are defined. So if you look at file, new project, these are all templates. Doesn't matter which one you choose, they're all the templates. They're defined somewhere on the file system. You just have to know where it is. Some of these templates are predefined, so you can call them by name. Some are not, especially the web templates are very difficult to deal with. Anyway, so what I'm doing here, when I create a solution, first thing I'll just check if the solution is open. So this is another property in my solution, in the solution interface, and you can check if the solution is open. You can close it, you can do whatever you want, you can save it, or some other things. Now another thing in the DTE that I'm using is properties. So that's something I wasn't really planning to show up, but it doesn't hurt. So DTE properties, using the properties you can pretty much look up whatever is defined in your options. So if you want to look up where your projects are actually being created and saved, if you want to get the project's location, this is my location, and if I want to create something in there, this is how I would get this variable, and that's how I used it. So the projects and locations is this guy. So that's how I get the properties, and then I find the item, which is project's location, and that's how I get the setting. And if that is defined, I'll just create a solution there. So this is another thing that's very interesting. You can see in the solution I can use create, and then I can save it. So in solution I can play with that. I can actually call quite a few commands down here. I can close it, do whatever I want with it. One of the things I can actually add from template. So if I call this guy add from template, I just provide what's the file name and what will be the destination and what's the project name. So if I wanted to use, I'll show it down below how I'm using it for creating C# class libraries. but this is how I would use for simple things that are the names are really well defined. That doesn't work for web projects. Anyway, so what I do before I actually create the projects, I create a solution, I save it on the file system, and that's pretty much it. Now there are a couple of things that are pretty tricky here, so it's not really easy. So in my case, when I showed how I wired up different projects into one solution and added references, it's not really trivial how you can do these things. So if the project is added to the solution, you can just query that one and say, okay, I'm gonna add a reference there. You have to be a bit smarter, so you have to subscribe to one of the events in the solution. If something is happening and one of the events is project edit, and in that case I did a bit of smarts to wire up projects according to my template and how I wanted things to be in there. So that's just one of the things. So as I mentioned before, DTE is very powerful interface, and one of the things you'll see here is events. So if something is happening in the solution you might be interested in, so if the build starts or something happens with commands, or if debugger events are starting up, you can subscribe to these events. So let's say if I want to go to debugger events, I can look up at the guy and I can choose what I want to do. If somebody's entering I don't know, break mode, the design mode, whatever I want there, I can subscribe to these things and change them for myself. Okay, so one of the things you have seen is that my projects were put into different solution folders. So that's the first thing I do. So after I created my solution, I actually go through the model of my template, and what I call here is I want to call add solution folder. So that's one of the commands here in the solution interface. So the solution interface again is coming from DTE. I could actually be calling solution, and then I could call add. Sorry, this one is not casted properly, so the default one is just DTE solution. Now one of the things it would be worth mentioning, Visual Studio is composed of various interfaces, and Microsoft was smart enough to say, if we're upgrading to some higher version of Visual Studio, we'll just name the interface a bit differently. So if we start with DTE, DTE would be the Visual Studio 2005 interface. DTE 2 would be the next version. So sorry, this one DTE is actually 2003, and this one is 2005, because you can see from the EMB DTE 80, that means the version 2005. And if I want to go on, and if I go to EMB DTE 3, it's not defined here, but if I added the different interfaces here, not really sure about this guy, but solution is the same thing here. So this one is defined for 2005, and this one is defined for Visual Studio 2010 plus. So you cannot play with everything when you're dealing with different versions. So if you want to target something specifically, so some commands are not available. In this case, if I wanted to add solution folders to my solution, I cannot do that for 2005, but I can do it for 2010 plus. So my solution, this guy, you can see that this is solution 4. It's just how the object was casted, and then I'm just getting extra functionalities there. So in this guy, when I have those solution folders, I just tell her that I want to add from template, and then I just cast it back to the solution folder. So I can cast it back to a previous one, but I cannot add them through the interface. Anyway, then I just get the project name, how I want it to be, and nothing really specific. I tell her in which folder I want it to be, and what I do then, I add these projects to my local collection. I'm gonna explain later why I'm using this. The most important thing is in the solution folder you can call add from template, and then you tell what template you want to use. Now we're gonna take a step back. So the project itself, you have to know whether the template has a known name. If it doesn't, you will have to manually find where that project is. I'm not gonna dive into details how this thing works. We're just gonna go through and see how we're actually pulling together the strings to get the solution created. Anyway, one of my properties in my logic is if I want does that project require the template to be discovered? If it does, then I'm just gonna look for it through the name. So one of the things I have in the solution is solution get project template, and this one will return back just a string, so I'll know what's the template name if it exists. If it doesn't, you'll have to be a bit smarter, and that's the fallback value I use here, just to know what's the name, which is hard coded in my template model in this case. And then on the solution folder I can call that I want to add a project from template, so I actually tell her where's that name and in what project folder I want it to be defined and what will be the full name of the project. So when I created that solution, sorry I closed that one, but I can create another one. Oops. Let me just revert the changes. Okay, I'm gonna open that guy again. So yeah, here on this guy, create projects. Okay, let's just create something simple. SSW test 1 2 3, and I'm gonna leave it with this. What I do, I call add from template. I tell her where I want the project to be, and so forth. Okay, so the next thing I'm doing down here is I actually add NuGet references. So if you remember the first demo with the Angular MVC application, it just created a basic MVC application and then it installed Angular JS NuGet on top of this. But the logic down here is not very straightforward, so it's a bit of going around here, because here's what happens. I call projects, so the add projects is just my dictionary with a couple of interesting things in there. So I have an ID for that project, and then I have just a collection of different, sorry, a tuple of quite different things in there. But if you can see here, I'm calling it with null, so pretty much the tuple is created with null, and then the full project name comes in here for this guy, and then I'm using project references as a collection of GUIDs of other projects. And what are the packages? The packages are just names for the NuGet packages. So I'm gonna stop here for a while, because if you can see here, project value.item1 would be my project, and this one is coming in as null. So if I would try to cast this one, it would throw an exception, but it never does. So now we have to go back to see where the smarts actually comes in place, and this is in the events. So when I create a project, I don't get the project name or anything like that. I have to subscribe to the event, and this is what I do here in the DTE events.solution events project edit. If I get a project in there, I will look up for that one and see if I have a name of that project somewhere there, and if it contains a key, I will just update that guy with the right project. So basically what I'll do, if the project comes in and if I have that key somewhere in the in my dictionary, so in this guy, then I will just upgrade that null, or sorry, replace that null with a project. And that's why this bit down here will work, because let's say it's a bit not really safe approach, the best one I figured so far, due to lack of documentation. But as soon as this guy is actually called, it will trigger this event here almost immediately. So by the time I get up here, because the projects are really quickly created, and even the events are actually quickly triggered even if the projects are still creating. By the time I get here, I'll actually have my entire collection pretty much ready. Of course, the solution is not bulletproof. I'll have to probably think of something better. Anyway, I assume that I have a project ready, and if the solution project is there, I will just ensure that I can add references. So from this point on, it's fairly straightforward. So the VS project interface, which is defined in the VSLang Pro DLL, so you'll have to use one of the DLLs here. Hold on, where that guy is. I can't find it. Oh, here it is. So you have to reference this interface, this assembly, and in there you'll have the VS project interface. This interface gives you an option to play with a couple of options regarding the solution project. Doesn't matter which one it is, and in here I can actually change if I want to add references or play with some other things. Nothing really dramatic. So that's how I actually was able to add references to different guys in the solution. So if I go back here, if I look at the business, using that logic I was able to add these references here into this solution. And once I'm done with each project, I can just call save, because I want the solution to be saved. Sorry, each project needs to be saved, and then I'll call at the end that I want to save the solution. So the logic itself is a bit complex, but the bits itself are pretty simple. So if you want to add a reference to your solution project, you need to have VS project. If you want to add a project to your solution, you can either add it as under solution. So if I go up here I have solution. If I want to add a project under solution without the solution folder, I'll just call add from template, add from file, or the other one. If I want to place it under the solution, you can just create a solution folder and then place it, and then just move it under that one. You have to call it through the solution folder. So that's another thing that's important. Yeah. So the final bit that I want to explain is how you can control the NuGet packages. Now this is where we touch the new part of the Visual Studio, which is the math component graph. What I'm doing here, I'm not calling just the regular service, I'm calling component model. And component model is just one of the services, as there are the others, but it's a bit different one. It just belongs to the math component graph. That's the whole thing you have to know about it. So this guy, if I called get service, so instead of calling component model and trying to get VS package installer, it would throw back an exception or come back with null or something like that, because that component wouldn't exist in the main graph. Sorry, I just got I lost my focus. Okay, so if I wanted to get this guy back from the get service, so if I called it like this, get service, and then push in type of this guy and try to cast it like this, it's very likely that it would come back as null. So that doesn't work. You have to use component model, which is this guy, as component model, and then you cast it back to this interface. And this service, this component model gives you actually a very nice get service generic. So you can type in, pass in the interface, and you're good to go. And this guy will come back as a component model. It's not difficult to figure out which one you have to use. All I had to do is to find what NuGet exposes. So here is a really nice blog post. If you want to play with the NuGet itself, this is what you can use. So if you search for NuGet services from inside Visual Studio, you'll get this really nice tutorial. It will tell you exactly what you have to do and how you can actually query the object model to get back the right components. From that moment on, it's fairly simple. All you have to do is pretty much call install package. You tell what's the source if you want to change it to use something else, otherwise just pass in string empty. Then you tell her you tell the component what project you want to install the NuGet package to, and then you just tell what's the package name. So that's where the Angular JS came in for my first project. If you want to have something version specific, you can pass in the version, otherwise just pass in null. And if you want to control dependencies, that's how you do it. So that's pretty much it. So as you can see, doing simple things is still complicated. So extending Visual Studio is not a very trivial task, and more complex things become even harder because there is not much documentation. But I hope you at least get a bit of heads up and a bit of grip on how you can start. I'm pretty sure I'll be doing another video at some point trying to explain more difficult things. But yeah, I hope that this gives you enough so you can start playing with your own extensions, and thanks for watching. Cheers.